the live stream.
Daryl, can we get the live stream and billboard going? Thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. We are pleased to have people in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 17 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our 243rd edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora global project. For 242 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday, and in the past 4 years and 8 months, we have featured 1,093 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 242 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for suggestions and volunteers. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. You can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. I'll introduce our moderator today, who is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thanks so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for choosing to be here with us. This program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Welcome to all of you on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, our IT manager has muted everyone. Speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thanks so much for cooperating. Our program today is entitled Bullies and Forms of Bullying in the Indian Diaspora. Why are we talking about this? The tragic suicide of 15-year-old Indo-Trinidadian schoolboy Jaden Lal Chand in October last year has brought the issue of bullying within the Indian diaspora to the forefront. According to the child's mother, his suicide was preceded by prolonged bullying by a fellow student who incidentally was Indo-Guyanese. But the police found little evidence to support her claim and did not press charges. The public response included candlelight vigils in support of Jaden's family. This was in Trinidad as well as in New York and several other countries. There was also outrage and statements from politicians highlighting the severe impact harassment can have on youths. Incidentally, last week on a political platform in Trinidad, accusations were made of bullying of politicians by a political leader. Bullying existed during indentureship as well. Indians were reportedly bullied, especially by former enslaved persons, hence submissive attitude and behavior in the presence of groups of Blacks even today. But what of bullying of Indians by Indians? What are the various forms in which bullying manifests? Do cultural factors contribute to specific types of bullying? Do zero tolerance policies toward bullying and implementation of discipline matrices address such issues in schools? What kind of support services are available for students and families affected by bullying, and are they sufficient? Our speakers will address these questions and more. And it's my pleasure to welcome our first speaker today, who is Dr. Crystal Gisyawan of the USA, who is a native of Trinidad. She's a member of the advisory board for the Silver Lining Foundation in Trinidad and Tobago, an anti-bullying organization that has pioneered 2 nationwide school climate studies. Crystal is also a visiting assistant professor at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta in the US. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you for the introduction, Shalimar. Can you all hear me properly?
We are, yes.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me and having me here today. I will be speaking to some of the data that we collected from the foundation, as well as our analysis and recommendations that we have made regarding bullying in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to begin by framing bullying as a manifestation of what many scholars have described as a culture of violence. And Shalima has already given a bit of background for this theory. Next slide, please, Shakira. So historian Bridget Brereton, in a 2010 article, she noted that Trinidad and Tobago, this culture of violence was fueled by systems of power and domination that centered physically violent mechanisms of social control, undergirded by symbolic violence, which refers to state logic, ideologies of race, gender, and class, and structural violence of state institutions. So she gives example of indigenous genocide and enslavement, African enslavement, South Asian indentureship, and the mechanisms of control that were used in those systems. And then in the post-indentureship period, she also notes the police violence, domestic and intimate partner violence, the corporal punishment of children, and ongoing socioeconomic marginalization of working classes are some of the ways in which violence is taken up by the state and filtered through this society. As an organization, we believe that this culture of violence that has permeated all aspects of Trinidadian society plays a contributing factor in bullying and how children utilize violence as means of resolving conflict. So this model by Nancy Shepherd Hughes and Philippe Bourgeois is this 2004 model of the violence continuum. If you would change the slide, please. It shows how these different types of violence are interconnected. So structural looks at institutional structures. Direct political violence looks at the direct actions by the state and state mechanisms like the police and the military. Symbolic violence refers to ideologies, systems of belief that are then mobilized through certain acts. And then everyday violence, it's what we think of typically when we think about violence. We usually think about interactive incidents, like what happens between people. And as I mentioned, our organization believes that it's necessary to tackle bullying by addressing violence across multiple societal institutions and scales, including through addressing legislation and the state use of violence, by addressing economic inequalities and the lack of opportunities, community-based projects and recreational services, and family support systems. So this leads us to ask the question then, slide please. How pervasive is violence in the country? Shakira, slide please. The country, the community, the school system, and the family. Because if we're saying that violence is influential on children and how they themselves utilize violence, we have to look at what their exposure is like. Slide, please. So in this graph from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, it looks at 2023 and 2024 crime statistics. It shows the prevalence of robberies, burglaries, larceny, and other acts of theft, which point to socioeconomic inequalities and the need to create more opportunities and better equity. And it's important to note that underreporting may skew these numbers. Um, According to a report in The Guardian written by Kenneth Mohammed, in 2024, Trinidad had 623 murders, of which half were attributed to gangs and all to organized crime. So we have to consider the context in which children are growing up in their various communities, because the exposure to gangs and gang violence, it's not necessarily uniform, and the children being localized in the schools that they go to, they're also not going to be exposed to the same kinds of factors to the same extent. So they may be experiencing violence within the society in different ways. So some children are being exposed to gang violence and organized crime. And as Mohammed elaborates, with a population of 1.5 million, the extent of crime that's taken place in Trinidad makes it one of the most violent countries in Latin America and the Caribbean for the past year. Slide, please. And you may have to make your screen big to see this one. But so this chart is from TT Crime Statistics, and it highlights this increase in the murder rate that has been taking place over the past 30 years or so. The numbers peaked in 2008, fell a bit, and then rose again from 2011 onward. Murder rates were impacted by the pandemic, where we see a dip in the number. But I want to bring your attention to the 2017 figures, which note that 53 women were murdered and 43 of them were due to domestic violence. And that is another manifestation of violence that it's very intimate. It's literally called intimate partner violence, where women are subjected to violence from the people who they are in most intimate relationships with. That's husbands, boyfriends, that type of thing. So domestic violence situations are the primary cause for women's experiences of death and murder and homicide. And this is the case throughout the world. It's not just specific to Trinidad, but we do have a prevalence of this type of violence. So next slide, please. Yes, the crime rate per capita and the murder rate per capita varies across different countries. But for Trinidad, based on its size, it's still quite significant. So there was a study by the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women, and in it, they displayed these statistics that 44% of ever partnered women experience intimate partner violence in Trinidad and Tobago, which exceeds the global average of 1 in 3 women. So that would be about 33%. Data from crime and problem analysis of the police service show that for the period 2018 to 2022, there were 4,667 reports of women and girls who were the victims of violence. And the data suggests that assault by beating, breaches of protective orders, and threatening behavior were the most prevalent forms of violations. And an alarming part of their findings was that in 92% of these reports, the women and girls who were the victims of sexual violence, that's what SV stands for, GBV refers to gender-based violence, 92% of these women were under the age of 35. So it's important to recognize that many women are experiencing this type of harm, and even though men also experience this type of harm, women do have disproportionately experience gender-based violence and sexual violence. And what happens when children are exposed to violence in the home and their community? Slide, please, Shakira. In our 2016 survey, we found that aggression in the home was more commonly exhibited in verbal ways, with 17% of students saying that yelling, cussing, and insults were heard most of the time or always at their homes. Verbal bullying was also more common in schools than other forms of bullying, and I will shortly start showing some figures from our survey findings. Physical aggression was less common in the home, with 7% of students saying that it was frequent to 18% of students. If we take into consideration students who said that it was sometimes, that they sometimes did experience physical violence in the home. So between 7 to 8% is where we're placing that number. And of those who experienced violence in the home, 36% they listed that their father was the most violent person, followed by their mother, and then other male family members like brothers, uncles, stepfathers, and grandfathers tended to be the most violent. And when we consider that men are the role models for young boys and how they behave, and our statistics do demonstrate that boys are more inclined to physical and verbal violence, it sort of overlaps with that issue. Slide, please. So my organization, the Silver Lining Foundation, we've conducted 2 nationwide surveys that aimed to assess the extent of bullying in schools, but also get a sense of how much aggression and violence students were being exposed to in their communities and their families. So I'll go over some broad findings. We assessed for verbal, physical, sexual.
Crystal?
Yes.
Right, Crystal, for some oddball reason, we're not hearing you clearly.
I'm not sure what to do about that. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Better
So
now,
I'll
yes.
just pull the mic forward then.
Thank you.
Okay. Where is the mic? Okay. Slide, please, Shakira. So these were the areas that we assessed. And as I show the following slides, you'll see some of the questions or some of the things that were included in what we asked. So with verbal bullying, for instance, we asked about the use of insults, cursing, aggressive language. Slide, please. And we found that these were the reasons for some sort of verbal teasing. Race only came up about 10% of the time, and we did gather some qualitative data as well, where students are able to explain further what they were experiencing in schools. So students did mention that race-based comments tended to be more on kicks, as they say, or more jokingly, whilst comments about sexual orientation tended to be not on kicks or more serious. And we also, there's an overlap between appearance and race, because appearance sometimes was connected to racial features, but for the most part, students said it was just saying things like somebody's ugly or unattractive. So that also sort of overlaps with sexual bullying, which we do talk about later on, which we have also looked at. And that includes things like verbal advances, unwanted touching, and things like that. Next slide. We found that male students teased more, they did more teasing and name calling at about 23% than female students. And across the board, boys also engaged in more teasing. They did more teasing than girls, and they also received more teasing. And as I mentioned, the things that were most likely to be commented on were appearance, race, sexual orientation, and religion. Slide, please. And these are some of the criteria that we asked about regarding physical bullying. If students would take someone's lunch or allowance, pushing, hitting, having their belongings taken or stolen or damaged, other unwanted violent acts, drinking or smoking under force or using illegal substances also under force. We put this into physical bullying. And we see here that pushing and hitting was the most prominent. Next slide. With regards to sexual bullying, these are some of the areas that we investigated. Unwanted touching, sending and requesting explicit photos, insulting a person whose advances had been turned down, making or receiving explicit gestures, in person, explicit comments online or on phones, explicit comments in face-to-face taunting, and forced performance of sexual acts. And we found that boys experienced a lot of sexual-based bullying more than girls. That might be counterintuitive, but we found that there was actually a lot of that. There was a little bit more inclination towards boys assaulting other boys, touching them in unwanted ways, and taunting them verbally as well with sexually based comments. Next slide, please. These also all tend to have some overlapping with cyberbullying, which is the use of cyber technologies to engage in acts of bullying, threatening behavior. So we have intimidation and threats, spreading rumors, and sexually explicit content as the criteria for us examining these here. And we can see how it's distributed amongst the students. So those findings were from the 2016 survey, and from the 2019 survey, we found that our demographic was mostly made up of students who were mixed race. At 40%, 32% of the respondents were East India, and 20% were of African descent. And we did not find race to be a statistically significant factor impacting how students perpetrated or experienced bullying, meaning that their race did not make them more or less likely to experience or perpetrate acts of bullying. Students were asked about racial tensions that existed in their schools. A quarter of students, that's about 23.8%, believed that there was tension in their school between people of different cultures and races and ethnicities, and about the same amount were neutral, with the rest of the students, 54%, believing that that was not the case in their schools. They did not have any sort of tension. And a similar majority of students also felt that teachers demonstrated the value of respecting other races, cultures, and ethnicities. Slide, please. And this attitude of teachers is very impactful as it models behavior. Studies have found that while children may express in-group bias, whereby race and racial background were used to determine who they accepted and with whom they formed social groups and friends, being able to build relationships across racial, ethnic, and other social boundaries fostered respect for diversity, deterred involvement in bullying, and reduced related victimization. Next slide, please. We also found that racial background had a medium-sized effect on students' feelings of personal safety. And it indicated that students of East Indian descent felt safest compared to other students of other racial backgrounds. The data also suggested that they showed strong family ties and support, which also contribute to these feelings of safety. They felt safe in school, and they felt safe to speak to their parents about issues that they were experiencing in school, which shows the value of having close family ties in helping students deal with issues that they may be facing, like bullying. Next slide, please. So this graphic is from the article cited below the image, and it shows the effects of social isolation on students. And social isolation and exclusion is also a form of bullying, and it encompasses many of the other forms of bullying, the physical, the verbal, the sexual, but the added aspect here is isolating someone from their peer group by excluding them from activities, not talking to them, playing with them, inciting others to exclude them. It has this effect if we look at the juvenile and adult impact. There's increased depression, increased anxiety, reduced sleep, increased mortality. And while the study is looking at quarantine or lockdown prisoners or empty nesters as a example or examples of where we see this occurring, the same is true of students who are in bullying situations. I used this graphic because I like what it entailed, but there are other studies as well that show the impact of social exclusion on students, which makes it very important for them to have that family support. Next slide. So we did want to highlight the recent case that Shalima mentioned of Jaden Lalchan. And we wanted to note, in addition to what Shalima said, that Lalchan is from a working class family. He is from the Princestown area. His parents are deeply, deeply affected by this loss. And in the aftermath of the event, um, the Ministry of Education and their representatives highlighted the bullying policy that schools have. Slide, please. So this sort of breaks down their trajectory if an incident occurs. So in the first instance, students referred to student support services. In the second instance, mandatory parent-guardian conference. If it persists, 7-day out of school suspension, etc. So they highlighted this and said that behaviors such as disrespect, defiance to authority, assault without a weapon, assault with a weapon, cyberbullying, extortion, forgery, gambling, lewd, inappropriate behavior, possession of alcohol, these are all behaviors that are disciplined utilizing this matrix. But what has been highlighted by Jaden's family's experience is that while he was experiencing bullying, and they did report several times to the school that nothing was done about the issue, and he continued to experience bullying. So even though he did have family support, the family felt that the school did not do enough to protect the child, which points us also to another response by Princestown Member of Parliament Barry Padarat, slide please, who drew attention to the normalization of aggression and violence in Trinidad society, which brings us back to where I began, that this is an issue that cannot be tackled with insularity, but it must be sought that we connect other types of inequalities and violence within the society, like gender justice, like social class and racial equity, that all of these programs have to be tackled hand in hand in order to deal with these issues, because we're not dealing with school violence in isolation from everything else. It's very much deeply connected to what we can call this culture of violence that exists in Trinidadian society. So if you can advance to the last slide. This is my foundation's information. You can find both reports on there as well as other materials for speaking with your child, especially LGBTQ children, because we do have a keen interest in gender justice and LGBTQ rights as well as part of our organizational model. So I want to thank you for this opportunity for me to present to you some of our findings.
An excellent presentation, Crystal. I want to thank you very much. We appreciate all the data that you've shared. It's an emotive topic, and especially the situation with Jaden. So I want to thank you for highlighting that. Ladies
Absolutely. And I want to invite everybody, if you are interested in knowing more, please check out the reports. They are free. They're available for download on our website. So you can get more insight into what we were able to find.
Good. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions or comments for Dr. Gisyawan, please, we can take some now. Kindly raise your electronic hand, which you will find in the reactions button at the base of your screen. Jay, go ahead, please. Are you able to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. An interesting topic. I started this in the 80s when I had contact with a teacher in London, England, who was ostracized for talking about bullying in the school system. And he and I had a lot of dialogue because I was head of human rights and I brought in bullying because I was a victim of bullying in my workplace in Canada and in South Africa. We were bullied to whatever you could see, from school system right through. But how in the school system reflects on the community, the diaspora, which is the Indian indentured diaspora. How does that fit in? Where does that habit of bullying somebody start from? That's something I hope somebody is going to talk about that because I have my ideas and I'll talk about it at the end. Because of the culture, just to start it off, of the community. If you look at an Indian film and you see the main stars of the what you call film slaps his girlfriend or his spouse, a male dominated male superpower against a female. That's where it starts, and in the family and its growth. So I'll talk about it later. Just that I wanted to see if there's a connection. What is the connection and why do people behave? I was, held by my code and say, hey, you have to do this or else in my workplace and even in the union, where the head of the body talks down to you, and that is where the bullying starts.
Thank you very much for raising that, Jay. Let's take a response from Krista.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to impress in the beginning, that we can't look at bullying as this repetitious use of violence in isolation and say, well, it's just happening in schools, and not understand that it's also part of a wider continuum of violence that occurs within the society. So we certainly do think that gender-based violence that you mentioned, the example of domestic violence, that is part of it. We're looking at race-based violence within the community. We're looking at the narratives and the ways in which violence is talked about, how inequalities are talked about, social class inequalities, racial inequalities, religious inequalities, etc. And Trinidad can be quite divisive in that way. Every single year we have a debate about temples. There's the what's the word, vandalism, and all these things that are occurring constantly, where people are feeling themselves being positioned as other vis-a-vis some other group. So I think this constant positioning as against one another, it really undermines our ability to see how these systems are harming us and the ways that we can move forward. So, with our project, for example, and our desire to teach conflict resolution in schools, teach about equity, creating safe spaces in classrooms. We've had programs that we've tried to make available to teachers of secondary and primary schools. We have had talks with the ministry about wanting to implement some of these types of strategies as part of the teacher's learning curriculum so that they can be better prepared as well to foster equity within classrooms, so that we can start combating these issues. You know, other things that we've recommended include community partnerships, parent partnerships, where uh, school communities are able to bring in parents and do these re-education programs as well, so that disciplinary structures can extend from within the school into the community. And these are not punishment-based disciplinary measures, but restorative justice practices. How do we make amends when we make mistakes? How do we try to reduce harm and see how we can get our ideas, as idealized as they sound, into this society so that we can start what's the word, chiseling away the things that you are mentioning, right? The ways that we are using violence in these normalized ways in our everyday lives. You know, violence is very much normalized, and bullying we are seeing as one manifestation of that. And we've had issues with the ministry, and that's a whole other topic of conversation. But, you know, it's something that we have been advocating for, that there needs to be a society-wide approach to dealing with violence. There needs to be economic things. There needs to be supports in the communities that help with issues that are facing people in the community, like alcoholism, like financial planning, you know, things that are basic, that we don't have, you know, that we lack. Yeah,
Okay,
so
thank you very much, Crystal.
sure.
I
Thank
want to
you.
bring in our second speaker now to add value to what has already been said. And this is Dr. Fauzia Jelani Williams of the USA, UK, and United Arab Emirates. She's all over. She's an author and advocate for children's rights, recognized for her innovative adaptations of classic tales and mirror books that celebrate children's identities. There's a lot more to this lady. However, she will share with you. Welcome, Dr. Fauzia.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Let me just share my screen with you. Please let me know once you can see it.
It's coming up now.
Okay, that's lovely.
If you can just put it into full screen, that should be fine.
Is that good?
Well, it hasn't changed as yet.
It should have changed by now. Yeah?
Try it again.
Is it okay now?
No change. Can you put it into slideshow? And
It is on my screen. It has gone to slideshow.
okay, so we'll work with it as is.
Okay, so I'm changing to the next page. I just want to make sure that is it on the next page for you? No? Okay, that's problematic. Okay, one moment.
We're still seeing your greetings page.
Saluting everyone. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
excellent. Okay, that's lovely then. So I am saluting everyone with the greetings used by those of the Indian diaspora. So salam, namaste, sat sri akal to everyone. And thank you to ICC for this wonderful invitation, for creating this space and dialogue and understanding. I am very new to the group, so please bear with me if I repeat things that are quite basic. So in this presentation, I introduce myself as a member of the Indian diaspora, reflecting on my parents' journey, providing an overview of my work on bullying as an author of children's picture books, and sharing a story which can be classified as bullying. Now, you'll notice that as the PowerPoint goes from page to page, I've actually typed it out because we're doing online. Are you able to see? Can you see this page?
I'm sorry, it hasn't changed for us. It hasn't.
Can you see? It hasn't changed?
No.
Okay, so I am actually in the United Arab Emirates, and we are quite away from you guys, and it could be a time delay. I'm going to tell you when I change the page, so it should have changed. Can you see in this presentation?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
If excuse me, Dr. Fauzia, I think if you have it as the presentation mode, it's not showing your presentation window, it's showing your primary PowerPoint window. So if you just leave it in there and not present it and just switch through the slides, we should be able to see it.
Okay, so
Thank you very much, Krista.
okay, so hang on, just walk me through that again. So at the moment, I've got the slideshow. Let me go
Share the
to
slideshow. Share the slideshow, but don't present it. Because that was the issue I was having as well. It wasn't allowing me to show the presentation window. It was just showing the PDF, the PowerPoint screen.
Okay, so for instance, for some reason now, it's not allowing me to share. I came out of it. Who has the privilege of making me a presenter?
The host. Just hold a minute, please.
Thank you.
Can you try again to share your screen?
It's still not coming up. Still not coming up. I have to wait until the
Daryl?
share.
Daryl, can you assist, please?
What is the message saying? What is your message?
It says disabled share, host disabled, attendee screen sharing.
Okay,
So,
Daryl,
Can we try again? And just reset everything for you.
So I'm not quite sure why. Okay. Can you see it now?
yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go from this page. I've gone to the next page. Is everyone seeing the next page? Saluting everyone?
Correct, yes.
Saluting, yeah.
Okay, good. This one. So I'm on to
Yeah,
a map.
Yes, we can
Excellent.
see now.
Moving.
Okay, that's lovely. That's wonderful. Okay, so both of my parents were born near Jalandhar, which is here. And so that's basically what connects me to the diaspora through their heritage. So my parents went, my father went to Karachi and my mom to a place near Multan. So I'm on the next page. My mom's family moved to Khanewal, and later my grandfather went to a place called Toba Texing, which is about here, just north of Khanewal. So there's an interesting story, which I classify it as a bullying story. Toba Texing, which where some of my mother's side of the family live, it's a Sikh name, which is unusual because the town is in a Muslim region. So according to the story that my mother told me, officials once attempted to change the name of the town. So they wanted to change it to probably a Muslim name. So who was this person called Tek Singh? He was known for his generosity. And for many, many, many years, he would offer water to travelers and passers-by out of love and respect for him. The place is called Toba Texing, and Toba actually means like a reservoir or a pond. So it's a story of how bullies wanted to replace something that was good, but good people resisted that. So I think it's a beautiful testimony about the Muslim people living in Toba Texing to be able to keep the name to its original person who was not a Muslim. So for me, it was a moving story. So my father was probably around 10 years old when Pakistan was created, and my mother was about 4 years old. And of course, as you know, they were among the 15 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs that were forced to leave their homes. My parents moved to England in the 60s, and I was born just north of Birmingham. So my parents loved to tell us stories. And I not only love to hear stories, but I also love to write them. Can I just ask you to confirm that you can see the slide where I'm holding the Ramadan drama? Are you seeing that? Excellent, lovely. Thank you. So I've written many mirror books. Mirror books are exactly as the word says. So let's say you're holding a mirror, you're going to look at yourself in the mirror. So a mirror book will tell you about the food or the place that you live, your culture, your family, the clothes that you wear, everything that is familiar to you. So we call those mirror books. And because we didn't have many mirror books as I was growing up and when I was a teacher, I put my attention to that. So I made sure that there were minority characters. So for the last few years, I served as a cluster librarian for 13 schools. I set up new librarians with my team. We read many books and we do many programs. And one of these is Anti-Bullying Week. So those of you who teach in schools will know that this occurs in November. Actually, Anti-Bullying Week or anti-bullying should be there every single day, inshallah. But there's a particular focus on this in November. So during this week, we read stories designed to empower children and raise awareness about Anti-Bullying Week. So we read the stories. I've written some that feature characters who display bullying behavior. And the aim is to help students understand how to recognize and navigate bullying behavior. And that's basically to empower them to handle situations where they confront a bully or where they see a bullying situation and they step in. So these are some of my stories. Tina has a huge problem. I remember in my classroom, there used to be a child and they would constantly push. So I created a story where this character, she just pushes everybody, just pushes. And when children see that in picture form, they relate to it, and also it allows them to know what to do if they see that. So towards the end of it, the end of the story, they know that pushing is wrong. It doesn't make people like you, and they don't gravitate towards you. So I think it's very, very important that children from a young age are exposed to these stories. So the button box was written by Bridget Hodder, and I wrote some of it. And again, it deals with certain bullies and how do we overcome them. Hina's Happy Heart is a very special story for me because I based it on one of my students who it was like she had her heart broken. And if you see on the picture, there's a big heart. So Hina always wore a happy, big, happy heart, a big, huge smile. And in this story, what we do is we have a great big heart, and then it's torn, like paper is actually torn away. Every time someone is mean to her, a part of that happy heart is torn away until there is nothing left. And that is very, very powerful for our students to see the effect that that can have on their classmates. Oops. So I also do adaptations, and when I was young, I used to love the fairy tales. So for Muslim students in particular, I rewrote these through an Islamic lens. And as you know, each of these fairy tales, they have somebody who is a bully, who is cruel. And that is retained in the story so that the heroine can overcome that negativity. These are just some more books I did. And Stop is it actually reflects what is happening in Gaza at the moment, and it's a new release. So this is the story I'd like to read for you. It's a story about partition. For me, when my parents told me how they had to leave their homes, they were pushed out as 15 million other people were. And to me, that's bullying. When somebody makes you do something that you don't want to, and something that's wrong, it's bullying. So I want to apologize that there are no illustrations for this, but I will read the story for you. So in 1947, the partition of India was declared and Pakistan was created. It marked the largest mass migration in human history. Over 15 million people lost their homes and over 2 million lost their lives. This is the story of a little boy called Shah, who was one of the 15 million, and his father, who was one of the 2 million. Shah lived in a small village. Everyone worked hard. Everyone was happy and everyone lived in peace. One day there was a proclamation. The country had been divided. People were told to move from one part of the country to another. The people in Shah's village were very sad. Everyone had lived in peace for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The families did not want to move. Their village was their home. One day, men came to Shah's village and told some of the families they had to go. It was not safe. Go to the new country, said the men. Shah's father was very, very old. He was very sad. He did not want to leave his country. He did not want to leave the land of his ancestors. News spread that the bad men were approaching the village. Run, said the neighbors. The bad men are coming. They will hurt you. In the night, Shah's family left their village. Their neighbors helped them. They had to walk a long, long, long way. It began to rain. Very, very, very hard. Shah was holding his old father's hand, but the rain kept making his hand slip. There was a big hole filled with water. Shah fell in the hole. Abba! Abba! He shouted. Abba! Abba! But his Abba was very old. He did not hear him. The rain was falling too hard. That was the last time Shah saw his Abba. He never saw him again. Shah's sisters and mothers were walking a short distance behind him. His elder sister saw him and she pulled him out of the hole. Where is Abba? She said. Where is Abba? Shah's family stayed for weeks in the camp, looking for their old father. There were thousands and thousands of people to ask, but no one had seen him. Shah's family moved to a town near the sea. Shah had stopped talking. He didn't say a word. Shah was always sad. When Shah began school, Margoob and Maqbool made friends with him. Margoob said, "It's okay, you don't have to talk." Maqbool said, "I'm going to teach you how to whistle." When Shah was 11, he learned how to whistle. The children said, "Shah has the loudest whistle in the whole wide world." Whenever Shah saw his friends from far away, he would whistle. His friends would turn and look. They would wait. Even when it rained very, very, very hard, everyone could hear Shah's whistle. Everyone would turn and look. When Shah was 12, he had the tightest hand grip. The children said, "Shah has the tightest hand grip in the whole wide world." When Shah climbed trees, he could pull his friends up. Shah never let go. When Shah played pulling games, he always won because he never let go. When Shah was 13, he could run very fast. The children said, Shah is the fastest runner in the whole wide world. When Shah ran, he could catch anyone, even if it rained very, very, very hard. When Shah got married, he always held his wife's hand tightly. She would smile and ask, why do you hold my hand so tightly? Shah would close his eyes and whisper, because I never want to lose you. When Shah had children, he always held their hands tightly. They would laugh and ask, Abba, why do you hold our hands so tightly? Shah would close his eyes and say, because I never want to let you go. Now Shah is an old man. Shah still thinks about his father. Shah says to his children, when I pass away, I hope the first person I see is my father. I will reach for his hand and I will hold it tightly. So I think I've stopped sharing now, I hope.
Yes, you have.
Okay, so that was, I feel like it was a story of bullying because it bullied a child. And so that's how I related it for today's theme. And that's actually the end of my presentation. I hope it was okay. Thank you.
Dr. Fauzi, I want to thank you very much. It's not easy to share a personal story. You've done that. And we really appreciate it. MK, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
MK, you're muted.
Dr. Williams, thank you very much. I think that's a very touching and moving story. I am a mediator myself. And I think through your story, you've given yourself agency. Because through massive upheavals, we carry trauma. They say from research that trauma is carried intergenerationally for up to 7 generations.
Oh, subhanAllah.
Yeah, and people never talk about these things. So I think that you have shown the power of storytelling and drama and literature to excavate those hidden traumas that we all suffer from and we cannot speak so easily about. But you've done it in a very positive way. You haven't done it through hatred. You've turned pain into opportunity. I think that story shows the power of agency, that people not only wallow in their past grievance, but give support to others. And they want to make sure that those who they love do not lose their hand. I thought you did it very well. In a very simple way, you have said a very powerful message. I want to thank you for it.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. I just want to add to that. When I was a little girl in England, I saw my father hug a man in town, and I found it very, very unusual. I wasn't used to that because I guess the British culture, the women would hug, but the men didn't. But anyway, what I noticed as I grew up was my dad didn't need to know the name of someone. He could just recognize if somebody was from India. He would know if they're Sikh or Hindu or obviously Muslim. And we would call these people uncle and auntie, and they would come to our home. So I remember my aunt, who was quite a bit older than my father, saying, because I would ask her, well, how was life in India? And she said, we all lived together. We We didn't eat the food that was meat from anyone else, but she said if somebody passed away, we would go and give our condolences. She said everybody lived together. And if you look at England today, or if you even here in the United Arab Emirates, everybody lives together. There is no separation. And so it's just so sad that our parents had to go through this, that generation, and so many. And it's not, I didn't know. And that's another shocking thing, that this type of trauma happened. And my father, he very, very rarely spoke about it, but we know that there are very, very large nails in the shoes of anyone who's had trauma like that. So thank you very much.
And we want to thank you again for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, I know some of you all may have questions and comments, but what I want to do is bring on Dr. Fauzia's husband, Dr. Robert Williams. And after his presentation, we'll take your questions and comments if you would like to air them. So Dr. Robert Williams, also of the USA, UK, and UAE, is a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Akron. He is also a cultural...
Yeah, I'm
And
ready.
everyone is muted.
I'm not muted anymore.
Okay, just hold 1 second. Let me introduce you properly. As a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Akron, he's also a cultural and political ethnographer specializing in the comparative study of crime. Welcome, Dr. Williams. Now you can unmute. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay, so who's going to do the PowerPoint for me?
Shakira is bringing that up now.
Great. So welcome to this lecture. My name is Dr. Robert Williams, and I am a political ethnographer of crime and neo-colonialism. I want to begin by thanking the organizer, Shalima Muhammad and Shakira Muhammad, the organizers, led by Professor Kumar Mahaber, for putting this lecture series together and inviting me to make this presentation. Bullying is an overdue theme. And in this PowerPoint lecture, I seek to put forward an historical reconsideration of bullying and its colonial origins to eliminate today's neo-colonial forms. Next slide. The commonality of empires as a form of bullying is this presentation's theme, while suggesting that colonialism is key to the establishment of European overseas empires. That European colonial, the idea that European colonial processes are under-theorized and understandings of bullying is something that I have discussed previously in my book, Garrison State Hegemony in U.S. Politics, published by Pierre Lang. Here, I briefly survey the ways in which bullying is central to the emergence of Anglo-Western hegemony and the post-World War II development of neo-colonial bullying and why that matters for the Indian diaspora. Next slide. During the past 2 millennia of Earth's erratic yet continuing emergence from its fourth glacial age, most human beings were located largely in areas where food was abundant. So I'm thinking of California with over 300 different linguistic groups, and the South Shore of West Africa with over 400 different linguistic groups. People basically stepped out of their shelters and they pulled an avocado, guava, I think we call it amrud, or an orange from a tree, or a cucumber or a grape from a vine. Whatever they wanted to eat, it was just there at their doorstep. Next slide. In grasslands, however, people tended to hunt by following roaming herds of wild animals to pick off stragglers who were not healthy enough or young enough to keep up with the rest. So, for example, in glacial North America, descendants of Northeast Asian migrants from Japan's northern islands hunted mastodons into extinction. In India, arid areas with no nearby rivers to feed irrigation canals, food was not as abundant. So the domestication of elephants and other animals arose to meet this challenge. People had to interact with each other and the environment in order to survive. Next slide. But with farming, we see an advance in human technology, especially agriculture and technoculture. These agricultural places usually sprung up along riverbanks and at the mouths of rivers in desert areas. These rivers had their origins in snow-capped mountains hundreds of miles away. Desert regions, though, were not conducive to the reproduction of bacteria and disease. A human would double her or his lifespan by living in such an arid desert region fed by these rivers. Now, one could live to 80 years of age, whereas if one lived in a tropical region or a constantly temperate coastal climate, such as the British Isles, he or she would be lucky to live past 40. Not only is food abundant in those areas, but so are diseases, bacteria, and other things in nature unkind to human longevity. So again, the reduction of these risks posed by nature was conducive to human longevity. Next slide. Further, the water from melting snow from mountains hundreds of miles away allowed for irrigation in those arid regions for about a mile on each side of the river. So I'm thinking of the Nile River as it flows north from mountains that are south and east of the Sudan. It flows north through Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. And they created a civilization there. I'm thinking of the Indus River, fed by 5 different rivers, or Punj-Ab, which means 5 waters. These 5 rivers originate in the melting snow of the Himalaya mountains. Those 5 rivers flowing into the Indus River contributed to the rise of Mohenjo-Daro on the Indus River, the earliest known civilization yet discovered by archaeologists. Next slide. What happened next is that for about a mile on each side of the river, farmers had water and they could irrigate their farms, but people 5 miles from each side of the river or further had no water. So when the farmers who lived closer to the river or one of its irrigation canals went to sleep, those who lived far further away simply raided their farms. They decided that they took what they needed to feed their families. This problem was soon addressed, however, by the farmers. They decided to hire one of their own, less ambitious, and to be a security guard. And they likely told him, you do not have to grow food for you and your family. Instead, we'll grow the food for you and your family. You just stay awake at night and keep these people from raiding our farms. So the prospective security guard, he likely replied, well, that's great. I'm a night owl anyway. I do not enjoy getting up early in the morning. So that became his job. Next slide. The security guard soon discovered, however, that he needed help. There were just way too many people out at night raiding farms to keep them all at bay. So he went back to the farmers and said, look, I need help. I need helpers. I cannot do this by myself. So the farmers agreed to hire some helpers, and the farmers would grow the food for their families too, so they could sleep all day and patrol the farms at night. Well, this man, the security guard, and his band of helpers soon realized they were a protection agency or a fledgling government. They realized they could dictate to the farmers how much they wanted to get paid and how much help they wanted in terms of additional helpers. Hence, government was born. Next slide. Apprehending the relationship of government to bullying as a protection agency is essential, because what happens next is different protection agencies will get into wars with each other. They want to be the one protection agency who tells the farmers what to grow and how to part with it. They do not want that other protection agency and those other security guards doing it. This is also the advent of war and eventually empires. The early wars on behalf of empires were largely fought with bows and arrows, lances, spears, and swords. Next slide. When the invention of the musket around 1550 made a knight and his armor obsolete, that pretty much turned everything on its head. The economic system in Europe until that time was the feudal system. Every castle housed nobles, and usually the nobles were a duke and some of his knights. As security guards, the knights protected the peasants who farmed land around the castle, and they gave 10% of their crops as a feudal tithe to the duke as lord of the manor. The duke would then redistribute that to his knights minus what he needed to eat. The knights would then take their distribution of food and redistribute it even further. They would give some to the smith, who made the knight's shield, sword, and armor. But after gunpowder and cannonballs were invented, the medieval castle and its knights became obsolete as a protection agency, and empires of extraction emerged, led by new economies of commoditization, quite distinct from earlier colonial formations. These economies of commoditization would give states, the protection agencies, the opportunity to tax and that way gain the funds necessary to fund this new form of warfare. Next slide. With gunpowder and cannons, there was not enough food to pay all the workers who had to go into the mine to dig out the ore that would make a cannonball. And when that cannonball was shot, it made a hole in the castle wall, but it also broke apart into pieces. After just one impact, it was lost. And it was a very expensive piece of equipment. The loss had the Duke and his knights scratching their heads. Traditional warfare with armor and a shield and a sword did not work anymore. Plus, the requirements of the new technology for warfare were very expensive. They lamented, "We can't even grow enough food to begin to feed all the people necessary to cover the requirements of manufacturing this new technology." And so we see in England and the Netherlands and other European countries a move to a commodity-based economy where they could tax commodities to pay for protection costs. That meant peasants were uprooted when dukes perceived that their land was more valuable for sprouting factories than sprouting food. For many, the subsequent 1648 Treaty of Westphalia marked the advent of a system of sovereign states that would spark a landscape of empires around the globe. Next slide. This upheaval was greatly exacerbated after James Watt's invention of the steam engine in 1769. The resulting industrial revolution so shocked some academics of that time that their concerns soon gave birth to the academic discipline of sociology. It was no good philosophizing from an armchair about these problems. Early sociologists were those philosophers who wanted to study empirically what was happening and why it was happening and what could be done about the mass inequality and poverty resulting from this. Next slide. Now I wish to focus our attention on the Indian subcontinent under the English Crown's empire and India's so-called independence in 1947. In the slides ahead, I revisit the 1947 UK partition of the Indian subcontinent to speculate on the extent that India, Pakistan East, now Bangladesh, Pakistan and Sri Lanka today might reflect a neo-colonizing bullying project. I proceed by asking, when did a British foothold in India begin, and how did it unfold to establish dominion? These questions are key because a sociological bridge between the old and new can often be discerned, especially by examining how those who have the power to command and produce space are therefore able to reproduce and enhance their own power. Next slide. Unable to see impending betrayal by Mir Jafar, Siraj-ud-Dawla was defeated at Plassey in 1757 by the English Crown's East India Company, led by the criminal Robert Clive. Siraj-ud-Dawla's capture and execution ended Bengali sovereignty, which marked the beginning of the English Crown's empire in India. Next slide. Although poverty was never eradicated in India, Indians had never encountered mass starvation until the arrival of European bullies. The 1770 famine owed to a combination of harvest failures and the bullying diversion of food from starving Indians to the English Crown's troops. Next slide. The English Crown's empire expanded rapidly during the early decades of the 1800s. By 1849, the United Kingdom had annexed Punjab and transferred administration to 8 English Crown officials. In Meerut, 3 Indian regiments were court-martialed to 10 years in prison after they were previously ordered to bite off the animal greased cap on a cartridge and refused. Eating pork is prohibited in Islam, same as in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament of Christian Bibles, and the cow is sacred to Hindus. So Muslims and Hindus were both defiled. Most of the court-martialed Indian soldiers were stripped of their uniforms and placed in shackles. As they were marched off to jail, the court-martialed Indian soldiers berated their onlooking comrades for failing to support them. The next day, these berated Indian troops broke into revolt and killed United Kingdom junior officers who attempted to stop them. This reaction morphed into the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Prior to the Indian Rebellion of 1857, these United Kingdom colonies in India did not warrant much attention from Europeans simply because these colonies held few European settlers. Not until the opening of the Suez Canal a decade later, compliments of another English Crown victory in the Anglo-Egyptian War, which shortened a 3-month voyage from India to Britain down to 3 weeks, did you see European businessmen and utilitarians stop seeing the cost of shipping goods from India as prohibitive. Next slide. We should also note, though, that until 1867, only a mere 3% in England had the right to vote for members of parliament. Together with the English Crown, this aristocratic 3% with a monopoly on suffrage waged Anglo-Saxon empire. They were the bullies who made colonies, first in Ireland and later around the globe in North America, Africa, China, India, the Malay Peninsula, Oceania, and more. This aristocratic 3% also invented chattel slavery and later passed reparations to themselves as slave owners or former slave owners, funded by the suffrageless. And the suffrage, well, even after they got suffrage, it was paid. I was working in England and paid those reparations. Didn't stop until the 21st century. It is important to note that these boarding school bullies crafted the laws that the suffrageless 97% in Britain suffered, along with the rest of their empire's global victims. Next slide. The first of the early social philosophers doing sociology in England as a participant observer was a Jewish German immigrant to London in 1849. Now, although he didn't claim to be religious, his mom was Jewish. His dad had converted to Lutheranism so he could continue his law practice in Prussia after Jews were outlawed from practicing law. But Karl Marx professed to have no religion, but he was Jewish as an ethnicity, and Jewish from his mother's point of view, he was still Jewish or Hebrew. Anyway, Karl Marx he arrives to London in 1849. He's troubled by the unjust actions of these boarding school bullies. He saw through participant observation in London that the 3%, the aristocratic rich, and the English crown were getting theirs at the expense of everybody else. These aristocratic bullies controlled the voting. They controlled the schools. They controlled the Church of England. And they controlled the press. The English crown and its boarding schooled bullies had colonized Britain, Ireland, North America, India, China, and were advancing in Africa. Marx saw that social inequality is only benefiting the bullying 3%, and that it cannot be justified. He thought that was a terrible way to run a society. Next slide. Now, since World War II, bullying has deepened and expanded through neo-colonial forms. The emergence of neo-colonial states without significant transformation of the global political economy is noteworthy. Maldonado Torres noted that, quote, patterns of power that emerged as a result of colonialism, but that define culture, labor, intersubjective relations, and knowledge production well beyond the strict limits of colonial administrations survives colonialism, unquote. He suggested that coloniality, quote, is maintained in books, in the criteria for academic performance, in cultural patterns, in common sense, in the self-image of peoples, in aspirations of self, and so many other aspects of our modern experience, unquote. Next slide. In the 20th century, states fund unlawful actions by armed groups and government forces, including murder, land banditry, and blocking of humanitarian aid. In the hands of a mere 6 billionaires, mass media gives a news out to peaceful avenues for change, while stoking anti-immigrant bias with discriminatory rhetoric. With these 6 billionaires' mass media help, today, a certain billionaire has returned to the White House. Just today, Sunday. And which reminds me of that old saying, this axiom, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Publicity is publicity. And this certain billionaire was in the news daily the previous 4 years. Next slide. Waging a WWE-styled good guy versus bad guy view of electoral politics, the 6 billionaires constituting mass media kept their cameras and microphones away from the other 4 candidates for president of the USA. Most people can name only 2 of the 6 candidates because most people rely on mass media for their news. Subsequently, those other 4 candidates for president suffered a news out. Next slide. Anglo-Western bullies continue their relentless global bullying today. Meanwhile, UK and USA bullying is camouflaged by rhetorical claims of championing human rights, while occasionally doing so, which serves to masquerade their maintenance of kidnapping centers, secret kidnapping centers too, such as Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, which isn't a secret, but the others are secret prisons, we call them. In addition to violating the Anglo-Western concept of habeas corpus, USA's federal government violates nearly a dozen US federal statutes and international laws by supplying arms to Zionist land bandits in occupied Palestine, while condemning Russia for similar violations in Ukraine. Next slide. Resisting bullying in the 21st century is not easy, especially where the English Crown's empire is now Pentagon powered. How the English Crown and aristocracy were able to get the Yanks to support their empire after those same Yanks fought a war for independence in 1776 remains an under-researched area of history. Such research would benefit from learning more about British Secret Service wordsmith Edward Gibbon, who countered Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence in 1776 with his The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, also in 1776. Next slide. It is not difficult for one to feel overwhelmed by Anglo-Western hegemony and to imagine that bullying is inevitable, especially when bullies camouflage their bullying with false rhetoric to the contrary. Yet, such resignation only serves the bully's purposes. There is a reason why billionaires spend so many millions on electoral campaigns and why the Pentagon clandestinely publishes dozens of academic books yearly, while many ex-CIA serve in Congress. Constituting a military-industrial new global order, bullies today understand that democracy offers the masses a potential check on billionaires' bullying. Hence, the active maintenance of hegemony. Next slide. I began this lecture by listing a series of seldom questioned events in the history of Anglo-Western imperialism and global predatory capitalism. Perhaps if we improve our critical ways of seeing coloniality, we can overcome the most significant obstacle, which is coloniality's preference for anonymity. As former president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, first explained in 1965, quote, "The essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to it, is, in theory, independent and has all the trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political activity is directed from the outside," unquote. This lecture calls for seeing beyond the trappings of international sovereignty carried out by CIA, MI6, and even the Peace Corps to discover covert forms of bullying behind their public images. And with that, I conclude my lecture. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking a global outlook to this particular topic. You've dealt with it from an historical, socio-political perspective. And I think what effectively you've shown is that we are all victims of bullying. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take your questions and comments. Again, please raise your electronic hands, which you will find in the reactions button at the base of your screen. We've seen through Dr. Gisiawan's presentation, Dr. Jelani Williams' presentation, we've seen that you need to treat with it. We need to treat with it from childhood. And at this point in time, let me apologize to you all. My internet connection was unstable for a second there, so there was a pause. You should understand why. And again, I want to thank Dr. Williams for his presentation. Let's bring our first question from Mrs. Ila Gandhi. So happy to have you as always. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it gives us a new perspective on colonialism and broadening the whole concept of bullying to, how governments and how people in power bully people. So I just want to ask whether you have, in your research, have you thought of looking at corporates, the bullying of corporates? Because apart from government bullying, there are large corporates that are actually, holding the power, international power, and manipulating governments, manipulating, people. In fact, even many of the wars are being manipulated by these corporates. So, but these are again not properly researched, and I was wondering whether you would think of researching that aspect. Thank you, and thanks for a beautiful paper.
Thank you. Yes, in my book, Garrison State Hegemony in U.S. Politics, it began as an ethnography of America's third largest political party at that time. It had been for 50 years, but I think it slipped to number 4 recently, after it was co-opted by a certain billionaire. That's something that the 6 billionaires ignored as well. But I talk about corporations. Corporations want you to believe that they are products of a free market, products of a spontaneously free market order. They are not. Corporations are progeny of the state. Every one of the American colonies that the British put in North America was a crown corporation. The East India Tea Company was a corporation. Corporations have nothing to do with spontaneously free economic orders. They are the opposite of that. Only governments can create a corporation. Only a government can step in and tell others that these individuals are not responsible for their actions in their economic dealings with you. Instead, their business is going to be an artificial person in law, and it's going to be responsible. So who goes to jail when the business corporation does something wrong? Which is why CEOs get paid so high of a wage, because they're the ones who have to go to jail, not the owners. The owners never go to jail. Yeah, so I talk about this. An easy website that probably is easier than trying to read what I've written is POCLAD.org. It stands for Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. POCLAD.org. That talks about corporations. And so in the United States, the Supreme Court ruled in the 1880s that corporations were artificial persons in law, but they're not persons. A real person lives, and works for about 6 generations, and then we just can't do it anymore. We don't really start until we're maybe 20. So we're 80 after 60 years, and we die. We live and die in those communities that we live in. Corporations don't. They can live forever. And then the people that keep, anyway. Yes, corporations, if we think of them as akin to Roman armies who carried out the aims of Rome, then you can see how the military-industrial complex works. So it's the Pentagon. Pentagon is the power. They make sure that the U.S. dollar is only, it's backed by black gold, it's backed by oil. Otherwise, it'd be a worthless piece of paper that represents trillions of dollars of debt that can never be repaid. But they ensure that all global oil sales are done in the U.S. dollar. So when a certain Russian leader wanted to sell oil to the EU in rubles. That pipeline's shut down. It's been shut down for more than a year already. No more Russian oil flowing to the EU. All oil. If you suggest selling oil in, for example, in euros, you don't live very long. I'm thinking of Saddam Hussein. If you think of selling oil in a new Arab dinar in conjunction with 6 other Arabic-speaking countries that are oil producing, you don't live very long. I'm thinking of Muammar Gaddafi. So, yep, corporations are definitely hand in glove with empire.
Thank you. Excellent expose on that. MK, you had your hand. Can you unmute, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I think you covered the point that was also in my mind, which Masala Gandhi mentioned. I don't know if you've been familiar with Amitav Ghosh's work, but Amitav Ghosh, the writer, speaks about how primary products get manipulated in the whole question, like nutmeg in Indonesia, and then other primary agricultural products were always also the subject of great price fluctuations, where countries were dependent just on one product. And so how those countries became even more subordinated to a global program, economic system that was not always very fair in terms of equalization of wealth between the industrial North and the so-called South, a distinction which is now getting much more blurred, but the reality is still there. Thank you. I think you've covered that, and I just wanted to be grateful to you.
Well, I did want to answer something you asked earlier. You said you wanted to know where this bullying in schools comes from. You asked that of our first presenter. Now, if we back up to the invention of state schooling in the 19th century, that is very revealing as to why our schools act more like the prisons that I've taught in Ohio and in England in the past 30 years of my teaching. Why do they behave more like government indoctrination centers and produce the behaviors you would see in a prison or a young offender center? And so let us back up to the invention of state schooling in England. That was in the 1800s. So remember, nobody in England could vote unless they could speak Greek or Latin. Until 1867, you had to go to a voting booth and show that you had been to a boarding school. If the only language you could speak was English, you wouldn't be allowed to vote. You had to speak some Latin or Greek. These are the people who did the so-called British Empire. This 3%, these aristocratic friends of the crown, and they're not even raised normally. They go to boarding schools. They're there with a bunch of guys, or if it's your sister, she's at a boarding school with a bunch of girls, and they only see each other during school holiday. And when they get home for school holiday, guess what? Now it's time to go on a tour of Europe so that mom and dad don't have to clean up after the kids. The maids at the rooms they rent are going to do that. They don't have normal interaction with families. And these are the people who are doing empire. And that's why they can do it without a conscience. Anyway, They had schools, nobody else did. So then Andrew Bell and Joseph Lancaster. Joseph Lancaster is a Quaker, Andrew Bell is Church of England. They go to Madras, India, and they see one adult teaching 1,000 kids in a mosque, teaching them to read a foreign language Quran that nobody can speak. And yet in England, nobody can even do that with an English Bible, and the only language they know is English. And they're like, we need to do this. So they pinched the Madras monitorial method. Joseph Lancaster went to London. He had 1,000 kids that he taught all by himself using the Madras monitorial method. He didn't tell anybody he pinched it from India. He said he invented it. He called it the Joseph Lancaster method. But like so many British people of that time, they didn't invent anything. They just pinched it. He's teaching 1,000 kids to read and write. Elizabeth Fry, she's another Quaker. She went into the women's prisons, and it was easy to go to prison in those days. You could just steal a loaf of bread and you'd have to go to prison. People didn't write the laws, the 3% did. So it was very easy to go to prison. And she was teaching women to read and write English within weeks using the same Madras monitorial method that Lancaster was using in his school in London. This alarmed the 3%. And my God, they're reading. And they're going to read that stuff from the USA. And then they're going to come after our heads like they did in the French Revolution with the guillotine. So we're talking just 30 years later, you know, so they really were in a panic. What are we going to do? So they invented state schooling. We're going to slow down how fast they learn to read and write. Because by the time you're 10 years old, you should be ready for A-level college, but not if you go to a British state school, or any school that's on that model, because it was invented to slow down the rate of learning. And it controlled what they would read, okay? So that's why they invented state schooling. And then this artificial age-based grouping, that creates the peer pressure. Now compare this to the one-room schoolhouses, for example, in Ohio during the same time. If you were a bright kid and you got bored with your work because you got it done, you could look over the shoulder of the older kid who was in the same room with you. This older kid, he felt a duty as a role model to mentor the younger kids. Younger kids looked up to their elders in the classroom, whether they were just older students or the teacher themselves. You don't get that in age-based artificial grouping of children in state schools on the English model. They learn to ask each other. Teachers overwhelmed with the numbers in the classroom. They can't get any help from her, so they graduate from school and they never seek the wisdom of their elders. They just ask each other. Anyway, that was my answer to your question about why is this bullying in schools the way it is. I think it has structural colonial legacies that continue to reproduce, and we're not aware of it.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Crystal, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Professor Williams is saying. We agree as well, like my personal view as a sociologist also studying this material, I agree with everything you've said. And when we look at the Trinidadian situation as well, it comes up that the model still is carceral, and the discipline, the concept of discipline is still one that is based on this carceral state. And there was an issue that came up last year about military schools and utilizing the military school as a way to deal with students who are engaged in bullying. And I raised this issue that, well, we're still putting them in the same construct. The military is yet another arm of this violence-oriented state apparatus. And we should really be thinking about other ways. And I had a lot of backlash from saying that. But that is my viewpoint, that we need to move away from these violent systems. It's very colonial, disciplinary based, and it has been used to discipline our people. The prison and the whip and debt after that, have been used as ways to discipline the general public, discipline the working classes, and the working classes as the racialized class. And we're still seeing that happening. And being here in America, I'm seeing also, how that extends in this space as well, right? The use of physical punishment, financial punishment, incarceration, institutionalization as the mechanisms for controlling the population. So what we're seeing is in the disciplinary policies of the Ministry of Education and of the government of Trinidad and Tobago when they want to deal with bullying is an extension of these same ideologies. And it's something that we really want to contest and say, no, this is not the way that we're going to deal with it. We need to take a step back and look at how violence is systematized within our structures, right? Within our institutions. And then we can start to tackle the issue. You cannot separate any of it. You cannot separate the state and the economic system and the socio-cultural system from one another and then hope to fix one, right? That is not going to happen. That's all I wanted to add.
Excellent observation there, Crystal. And so it brings us to the whole point of having to revamp the entire system. As long as we continue the Protestant ethic, we are going to continue down this line. So the entire global system needs to change. How are we going to effect that? That's the question that we all have to address. And perhaps we'll do so in another presentation, another set of presentations with perhaps a different panel. I want to thank you all very, very much. This has been an extremely revealing session, and I hope our participants appreciate the work that went into it by all our three esteemed speakers. Thank you all very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, and we need to bring this very interesting conversation to a close. So again, I want to thank everyone for having spent the last 2 hours with us. And I'll turn you all over now to Shakira.
Thank you, Shalama. And thank you all for taking the time to attend and to participate. And yes, it was indeed very interesting lectures. Thank you so much to the presenters. As we've said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books. Remember that we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials, and please contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be the migration and brain drain in the Indian diaspora. So we look forward to that. Thank you to the advisory and planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir, to our IT consultants, Daryl Grantham and Navin Mangal, who has been advising and recording the program, which will be uploaded to our website and YouTube permanently for posterity. Thanks again to Daryl for designing the poster, and Robin Ramsing for the social media marketing, and Miriam Mohammed for producing our TikTok videos. So please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.